So it was really figuring out what I needed to live on a sailboat. Remarkably, like what it would cost you to live anywhere else. It's a lot more expensive than you might imagine. And then if I could get to the point where the building debt was paid down, and so it's what it's going to cost to live on the boat, plus can I have enough of a nest egg left over after that to be able to live after I'm too old to be on the boat, right?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here for another episode of the Lift Your Shop podcast. Today, we have an amazing guest, John Anderson, originally out of Olathe, Kansas, but now he is on a boat in Trinidad. But he's going to be able to share a lot of insights with us in terms of the process of retirement and kind of getting to that point. So, John, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And so, John, if you don't mind sharing with the audience how you got started in this industry and what, I guess, attracted you to the auto repair niche.
I think I was like a lot of guys. Start out young, tinkering on stuff in your driveway in high school and all that, and then eventually make a career out of being an auto. From there, I went and did a short stint for 3 years teaching auto mechanics, auto tech for the high school. It's actually for a boat tech school that served like 5 different school districts, but it was juniors and seniors in high school. I did that for a little while. We had a real terrible management problem that made me say, you know what, I'm going to go open up my own shop. And so I did that, started out nights and weekends. I rented a building for $250 a month with no heat, no plumbing.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had $500 in my box of tools, and that was my start. And that was in November of 96. And my teaching contract was up in May of 97, and I did not renew. And I started went full time at it from there. By August of 97, I moved across the parking lot to a bigger building that the landlord talked me into renting. He lost his tenant there and he conned me into it. It was a lot for me. I was paying $250 a month for this building. It was a shed.
Yep.
And he said, yeah, come rent this building for $1,500 a month in the late 90s. And you're just starting out. It's like, holy crap, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was actually in that building for, as it was, just in the back end of that building. And we were actually in the back by the dead end, like 2 buildings from the dead end in an industrial park. Absolutely the worst location known to man. Like all of our drive-by traffic worked next door. That was it. We had no drive-by traffic at all. I didn't know anything about back then. It was the Yellow Pages. That's what you did. There was no internet marketing. There were mailers, but I didn't know anything about them or didn't know anybody that knew anything about them. And that was pretty much it, was Yellow Pages and word of mouth. And then we did pretty well there. So 2001, we moved to the front end of the building as well, took over all of the offices, the whole building.
Wow.
So that I could get more shop space. And we signed that lease, which then of course increased my rent, on September 1st of 2001. So you can imagine how well that went 10 days later.
Yep.
And the whole world fell off a cliff. And so, yeah, I was really wondering how I was going to make it. But we managed to struggle by. And a couple of years later, I bought the building. And then it was in 2011 that I had a great real estate agent come by and say, probably about 2009, he came by and said, well, have you ever thought about moving? I was like, every day. And he said, what would it take for you to move? And it's hard to move your client base for an auto shop. You just really can't do it. You get a couple of miles radius, but outside of that, you're just about starting over. And so 2 years later, he walked back in my shop, said, I got a building for you. And so we went and looked at it, and it was a great building. The price was right. And so we remodeled that and made it from a warehouse into an auto shop. And that was the big building. And that's really where I knew that the goal all along, and if everybody doesn't know this, they should know this, that every building or every business sells at some point, right? It's really a matter of whose terms does it sell on. Do you work until you're dead in your business and then it goes to probate court and your family fights over what is left? Or do you work until you're completely burned out and you go bankrupt and it sells at the courthouse steps? Or do you sell it on your terms? And so that was really the goal, was to get it to sell on my terms. And so I did things as best as I knew how, which was not very well at first, to make it worth as much money as I could to sell.
Yeah. And I love how you brought up selling on your terms. I think a lot of people don't think that far into the future. They're just kind of going day by day. And I'm just trying to keep the business afloat. And I think things are going well. And I don't want to risk thinking something else. And so I guess at what point in like your business journey did you start thinking about, did that switch come on where I need to focus on how to get this business to sell? Was it very early on where you knew that was the path, or did it happen a few years before?
Well, I did know it was early on in the path because, and I got this bug to go buy a big boat and go sailing away very long time ago when I was only a few years in business. So that was always the goal. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I just couldn't figure out how until the last few years. It finally all came into shape since I moved to that bigger building and things like that. Things finally started to shape up to where it could actually become a reality. So and I got some proper coaching finally. I didn't hire my first coach until 2012. And that coach really, he did me a lot of good. Nothing bad to say about him, but he really focused on the sales side of things. And so then I got another coach and we really focused on the bookkeeping end of it and all that. And then finally with the final coach, it was very much leadership and it was really good. And so I got a lot from each coach.
Yeah. And I think, coaching absolutely is.
It should be the first thing you do. Keep the doors open, hire a coach, really. But then I've seen some guys with some really bad coaches, and I've seen some businesses fail miserably because of the way they were coached. So it's important to get the right coach.
Yep. And I think, being able to pivot though and realizing when it's right, when it's wrong, that's hard when you're in it and you're just within a coach. You don't really know if it's right or wrong or not because you're just feeling them out. But I think that's where for me, it's always about knowing the numbers of your shop, because the numbers will then, to me, tell the truth of like you can't hide, you can't fib those. So it's just like you need to know those. If those are going in the wrong direction, you need to change up who's coaching you.
That's another thing that I did was, so not very many years in it. I was probably in business, I don't know, 4 years or so. And I was told by a friend who had a little plumbing company that the first thing you need to do is hire an accountant. I had a string of terrible accountants. And even when I had a good one, you give them all your paperwork, all your receipts, you give them everything every month, and you send them on their way. And they come back the next month and they have your books from the previous month, and you have them in an envelope. You've got your P&L and the balance sheet in an envelope and all that. And you open it up the first few times, you don't know what you're looking at, and it goes in a drawer. And then eventually you just stop opening them because it doesn't matter what it says. You don't know what it means. And so I went to the local college and took Accounting 101. And I highly recommend anybody do that, just so you won't know how to do what an accountant does, but you'll know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
And you'll know even what it means to have a P&L and what it means to have a balance sheet and what any of that stuff is for. And eventually we got to the point where we were doing our own book, and I just had the accountant do the taxes. And so that my books were always up to date, up to the minute.
Yep.
Always had an accurate P&L, accurate balance sheet. And so then you could always look at those numbers and know exactly where you were all the time. And that's really important, to be able to manage it by looking at the numbers and by knowing where you're at, so that there's fewer surprises.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because if you don't,
there's way too many surprises as it is. You don't need that one.
I'm sure managing people in and of itself, there's always a surprise that comes with that. But you don't want to be surprised by the numbers one day and be like, wait a second, how much do I have in the bank?
Here's the thing that I was looking at is, okay, so I'm handing him my books, and so I've gathered up everything from the last month. He comes in the middle of the month. So it's all of the paperwork from 2 weeks, the month that ended 2 weeks ago. And then I'm going to get the books back for that at the end of a month from then. So I'm 6 weeks behind. What am I going to do about it? What are you going to do about what happened 6 weeks ago?
Yeah. Exactly.
You can't fix it. Yeah, it's history. Yeah. And so that's one thing that I started doing, was really started making sure that my books were always up to date. And not to say that I was well managed, because I certainly wasn't, especially in the beginning, but at least I knew how bad I was.
For sure. But yeah, I think, you at least were aware enough to know what things needed to be adapted. And you even took an accounting class. I love that you took initiative that way to learn a little bit.
Yeah, you just got to know what questions to ask, because that's the case with virtually everybody starting out, is they don't even know what questions to ask. You ask the bookkeeper or the accountant to explain to you what's going on, and they're talking in terms that you've never heard and don't understand. Yeah,
Yep. And so now we're at the point you're understanding the books at least a little bit better. You got a bigger shop, things are rolling smoothly. Now, what then pivoted to you deciding, okay, it's time for retirement? Obviously, like it's always in the back of people's mind, one day I will retire, but now
Sure.
you get to the point where now it emerges where it's like in real time, it's time for me to do this. So what triggered that for you?
So it was really figuring out what I needed to live on a sailboat,
That's
which is
awesome.
remarkably like what it would cost you to live anywhere else.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot more expensive than you might imagine. And then if I could get to the point where the building debt was paid down, virtually gone. And so it's what it's going to cost to live on the boat, plus what it's going to, can I have enough of a nest egg left over after that to be able to live after I'm too old to be on the boat. Right. And so we figured that we funded the sailing trip for 10 years. Right.
Uh-huh.
And we'll have the ability to go on past that. But that's when, so the way I structured it was that I still own the building. And so we're living off the rental income. It's a option to buy at the end of the lease. And I'm sure he's going to exercise that option. He would be a fool not to. So we've got 10 years of rental money coming in to pay for our lifestyle now, plus the sale of the business could be enough to live on for the rest of our lives. So you got to work that number backwards. What do I need to live on now? What do I need to live on in the future? And if I get a reasonable multiplier for and that's why you figure on the sale of an auto shop is it's a multiple of your net, right? So you take your 3-year net and basically it comes down to pretty close to a 3 years worth of net. And you might get a little premium on top of that. You might not. It depends on how involved you have to be in the business for it to operate everything. And so that's the thing is you've got to make the business, that's part of making the business as valuable as possible. Not only is a very high net, but then also a very high net without you. If you're an integral part of the operation, we remove you, then what do you have?
Exactly.
You have a giant hole to fill, and that's not easy.
Yeah. So you mentioned the word net. Just again to describe for people, what do you mean by net? And what do you mentioned the word multiplier? Like what do these things mean?
Net profit after the expenses and all that stuff. But really when you're looking at it at a business sale, EBITDA, and you'll have to look up what that means. You'll probably already know, but it's earnings before income taxes. I don't know.
Interest, taxes, depreciation.
Yeah, interest, taxes, all that stuff. Right. Yep. So you take that number and then the multiplier is really that number that's dependent upon how involved you have to be with that. And the less you're involved, the higher that multiplier is. And I got around 3.5 times net EBITDA, which is on the high end for a single shop operation. If you have more than one shop, then that spreads the risk for the buyer out among those other shops. So it becomes actually vastly more valuable, which is something I didn't realize until I was so far into the whole.
All right, we had a quick technical difficulty, but we'll replay again. So if you could explain for us again what net and multiplier meant as you were explaining that selling process.
Right. So you take your EBITDA after you calculate that, and then for a shop that has somebody who's not a part of the daily operations, which is what that was me. I made myself the shuttle driver a long time before I was ready to exit. And really, you could replace me with a $10 an hour guy, which was awesome. This is the best job in the shop. But so if you don't have to be, if you've got a good net profit percentage, you've got a good amount of sales so that net profit percentage is as long as the future outlook of the company is going to continue to be on the same trajectory that you're going.
Yep.
You can get somewhere in the neighborhood of what I did, which was 3.5 times your EBITDA. If you're part of the operation, that number goes downhill in a real hurry. I had a guy telling me who's in the business of selling shops and specializes in a lot of auto shops that most shops sell for about 1.6 times, which it's a huge swing. And a lot of guys and just people as a whole kind of get stuck on that number of $1 million, right? Everybody thinks if I have $1 million, that's like the unattainable thing. And if I had $1 million, I could retire and live happily ever after. First of all, you probably couldn't because $1 million doesn't go very far these days.
Yep.
And also your business, if you're an integral part of that daily operation, if you're working the front counter every day, If you're basically the whole front end of the shop and you're walking back there and you're the chief diagnostician and all that kind of stuff, and there are shops like that, when you step away, that shop is worth the equipment. It's really not worth much of anything. That client base isn't worth what you probably think it's worth. So you really have to work hard to make the shop not depend on you. And that goes for any business.
Yeah, for sure. And so what do you think then were your steps to then be that absentee sort of owner where you become just a shuttle driver? Like what progressions did you have to take to get to that point?
One of the first things you need to do is figure out who you're going to sell to. Are you going to sell it to an employee, which is what I did? And that's honestly the way most shops go, because you need somebody who knows how to maintain the operation as it is.
Yep.
And if you're selling it to an employee, you have to groom that employee to become the owner. And that's something that I did. I had the conversation with the guy who ended up buying the shop years before. He worked for me for 7 years before he bought the shop. The first 4 years, he was at the front counter, just service advisor like everybody else. And so then 3 years before I was ready to retire, I moved him into the office. I actually bought all new office furniture for my office and put him in the big desk and put me in a little tiny desk in the corner. And he was the manager, and I was just there for him to become less and less dependent on as time went on.
Yep.
And then, so that's really the thing, is you've got to figure out who you're going to sell to. And if you're selling to a total stranger, I don't even know what that looks like, because you've got an operation that may not continue the way it was. And yeah, I don't know if you're like me and you're depending upon that rental check and I ended up financing the sale, and that's another part of it. And because there are some things that some guys that I know that have retired who did a better job than I did about prepping the buyer to get the sale done through the SBA and through private lending and all that stuff to get that done. And my buyer, he listened to what the bank loan officer was telling him, which is completely not what the underwriters wanted at the end of the day. And so what ended up happening was that they were going to still write the loan, but they wanted me to guarantee the loan. They wanted me to be co-signer. They wanted me on the hook to come rescue the business should it take a nosedive. They wanted me to carry back a very significant portion of the loan and not get paid until after they got paid. Basically, they were pushing off all the risk onto me.
Yeah.
And while they took all the interest. So I went, if I'm going to take all the risk, I might as well take the interest as well. So we rewrote the deal, and I wrote him a loan, and I now have a second on his house.
But so right now, yeah, as we're progressing here, you took on all the risk in terms of the sale. You're the second lien holder on the home and everything like that, but you got the deal done, which is amazing. But I'm curious to know how it came about that this particular employee was going to be the buyer. Did this person show interest? Did you see them as like the heir to the throne sort of thing, or how did that work?
When I hired him, he kind of asked the question not long into his employment, where do you see yourself in the future? What's your future plans and all that? And he said, I'd like to someday own my own shop. And I said, told him, I said, at this point, which was true, I had just bought this enormous building and we are trying to fill it up with cars. I wasn't even revenue and net profit wise, not even close to sale ready, but we would get there. And I said, when the time comes, we can have that conversation. And so I had him in mind for quite a while. And as the revenue and the net profit started growing, I started putting him in there. And that's one thing that maybe some owners need to wrap their head around, is that the shop, it was one shop.
Yeah.
I didn't need a manager other than myself, but I needed him to know how to manage it. And I needed him to be the manager and then act like the owner and all that long before I stepped away. But that cost me $90,000 a year for him to be in the office with me instead of at the front counter making me money.
Yeah.
So that was another investment that I had to make in him to make sure that I could get paid.
Yeah, no, I love that. I said a lot of people, they would be more focused on their bottom line, saying, actually, I can get away with not doing that and bring in more home. But yeah, you're definitely thinking about the future there. So I do love that. So I'm curious in terms of the length of time that it took when you're like, let's start the sales process to when the sale closed. How long of a time did that take?
So I put him in the office 3 years before we were ready to go. So
Gotcha.
he was the manager for 3 years. And then the last 8 months, and of course, the deal got stretched out for a couple more months longer because the bank started jacking
Yep.
around with us. And then I just decided to do the loan myself.
Yep.
But so I put him in there 3 years. So he had 3 years of being the manager. And that was part of it to really, in my mind, to satisfy the bank was, is he capable of running the business? If you just take the tech out of the shop and you say, okay, now you're the owner, the bank's not going to write a loan for that.
Yeah.
The guy's not, he doesn't know how to manage the shop. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure is that for 3 years, we had him in the driver's seat and the shop was continuing to grow with him in the driver's seat. And then right at the end, I really needed all of the employees at the shop to stop looking at me for answers. So I just stopped going to work. So
Nice.
for like 8 months, I sat at home.
Just peeled off that band-aid real quick, made everyone else take action into the processes. I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, if I'm not there, they can't ask me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm sure they just got used to that process of I can just ask John and he'll know the answer
yeah,
for me. But
exactly right.
yeah, you
Yeah.
took
So
away that safety net.
and I've been back to the shop 3 times since we left, and I've yet to catch him there, the owner. But you know that the service advisors are all happy to tell me how great their sales is and how everything's going, and all the same mechanics are still in the shop. All the same people are there, plus a few. So yeah, good for him.
That's awesome.
That's the way I like it, because
Yeah.
that means my loan payment gets paid and my rent gets paid, and I'm fat and happy living on a boat in Trinidad.
And I think that also speaks to how well you were able to teach that now, even the few times that you're there, he's not even there. So I think maybe he's working on his process to being the absentee owner as well.
Oh yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, so that is awesome. And then in terms, I don't think we ever brought this up, but what time frame did you sell, and so how long now have you been retired?
So I bought the boat actually in 2017, end of 2017. And so, and it just, I sailed it down from Maryland when I bought it down to Florida. And so the boat just lived in Florida and I'd go visit it all I could. And then, so we sold the business in February, end of February, 2020, right in time for COVID.
Yep.
Yeah. But sold the house, sold the cars, sold, had an auction house come and just empty the house.
Wow.
Everything we owned was in the back of Tina's Explorer, and we drove it to Florida and got rid of half of that stuff. So
and so then from there, now that we're into retirement mode, did you immediately jump on the boat and set sail?
we got there, we got on the boat just in time for COVID. So there was nowhere to go. Everything was closed, shut down, and all that stuff. So we're actually floating in in Fort Lauderdale. And this everything in Fort Lauderdale is all these man-made canals and all that stuff. And they have these it's more like a cul-de-sac than a lake, but they call it Lake Sylvia. And so we were actually on anchor there from February until November.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah. So we were just there, and we did some work to the boat and stuff like that, some upgrades that we needed.
Okay. And so I guess once you were able to then start going places, did you end up sailing to Trinidad? Is that what the plan was? Or
yeah, so we sailed to the Bahamas for quite a while. Sailed all around the Bahamas, made it as far south as Great Exuma, if you know the Bahamas at all. That's pretty far down there. And so then we ended up with some things we needed to take care of on the boat. So we actually sailed back to Florida, because you can, from the rest of the world, and being an American in the rest of the world, is that we're very accustomed to just going, hey, I want this, and go buy it.
yeah.
And the rest of the world doesn't work that way. So we actually brought the boat back to the US, bought a new spinnaker, bought new folding props, got a few other things taken care of on the boat, and then back to the Bahamas. Went to the Bahamas, and then as it got closer to hurricane season, you want to be out of the Caribbean, that end of the Caribbean anyway, for hurricane season. So then we sailed straight to Panama. And from And we spent hurricane season down in Panama, did some more work on the boat because there's always cruising full time is boat repair in exotic locations. It's all you do is fix the boat. Like every now and then you get to see a beach, but usually from the boat while you're fixing it. That's pretty much what we do is fix the boat. But yeah, there's obviously a lot of fun that we get to have and all that stuff. But having a boat that you live on full time is a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work. So anyway, so Trinidad or Panama for hurricane season, did some work on the boat, and then we went actually up the west side of the Caribbean, all the way up to Mexico, and then we came across to the east, back through. Actually, went to Cuba for a little bit. It's a really pretty place, but man, it's depressing the way that people have to live there. Anyway, so yeah, actually hit the Bahamas again on the way through just to be able to get the sailing angles because you can't sail into the wind, and that's the way the wind blows. Yeah. Then down the Eastern Caribbean really fast because it's getting late in the season. Hurricane season starts July 1st. So you got to be down south of it if you can. Really the heaviest hurricane season is right now though. Yeah. That's when they all happen. September. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds really kind of just an amazing journey. And now congratulations that you're in retirement, enjoying retirement, even though I know it's a lot of work on the boat, but regardless, you're enjoying retirement. As we close here, what would you say is your best advice for an owner that is hoping to retire, say in the next 3 to 5 years?
3 to 5 years. If at all possible, identify your buyer and start grooming them for that position. And by all means, get your ducks in a row on your books. And if you're not showing all of the profit on your books, you better start, because that's how your business is going to be valued, is by the profit numbers that are on the books. I've seen so many guys be like, that's just what the books say. We make so much this, that, and the other thing. It's like, no, you don't. No, none of that counts. I don't care what you get off the books, under the table, cook the books, however you're going to do it. You better have pristine books, or no bank is going to touch you. Not that I didn't ended up having to finance this myself anyway, but still, for any owner anybody who wants to come in and own a business, they're going to want absolutely pristine books, and they deserve to have them.
Yeah, if they're going to invest in that much money in order to purchase a business, right, they want to get all the ins and outs. But I think you've shown here that by identifying a buyer and then having those clean books, you're able to increase what your payout is maybe by times 2, times 3 of whatever you were originally going to get. And yeah, this is that much more important for your future in order to do it.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah, you really can't underestimate the value in really taking the time to set your business up to be sold. You really have to work toward that with that goal in mind for years. You can't just decide next week I'm going to sell my business, and well, that's great, but you're going to get pennies for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're going to be very sorely disappointed.
And for those of you don't need to do it on your own. There are coaches out there
absolutely,
that have done it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I paid a lot of money to some attorneys and all that, and I talked to some guys that had done it. And my friend that did it, he put together a little sell your business on your own guide to how he did it, and he did a fabulous job. The banks just signed off on his buyer, and he walked away with cash at the end of the day. He just got a fat check, and I didn't. I've got payments, and I'll make money on the deal, obviously, because I'm charging him interest. That wasn't the intent.
Yeah,
but it's working out.
Yeah,
you got to set up that guy for success. That guy's if you want that rent check to clear, and if you want that payment, if you're financing the building or the business sale like I did, but that payment check has to clear, and so that guy has to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. And how long of a term is it, if you don't mind me asking?
So it's a 10-year note on the business, and then a 10-year lease on the building. Okay. So as soon as he's done paying for the business, he can buy the building. Gotcha. Basically how it's going to work out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll get another big cash infusion. And yeah.
That's amazing, John. Thank you again so much for your time today. For anyone that possibly would like to reach out to you, maybe get some insider tips of what to do. What was the best way to reach out to you?
A lot of guys will hit me on the Facebook Messenger or something like that.
Yep.
Is probably the best way. I can usually get data somewhere, but cell service is not always.
Yep.
Yeah, it just depends on where I'm at.
Yeah.
Because as soon as November comes around, rolls around, hurricane season's over, we're gonna head back up the Caribbean, and that's what we do. We just sail from island to island. You get tired of looking at that when you go look at it.
That's awesome, Joe. I appreciate your time today. And for those of you that are watching still, thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to our channel. But take care. See you guys next time.